Hey, what's going on, Guardians? TBL here, wishing you all a very happy new year and a warm welcome back to Planet Destiny. I know it's been a little quiet on the channel as of late, outside of the weekly guide videos, and there's a bit of a reason for that. We've kind of been taking a little bit of time to enjoy our vacation, a little bit of time off to spend with family and whatnot, and there's really not been anything we've wanted to make for Destiny right now. What with the situation going on between Eververse and the state of the game, sometimes it's good to just turn things off and focus on other things. But it's about time we got back into the swing of things. And this week we got a couple of articles and a couple of updates from Bungie and from the Destiny 2 community that are kind of worth talking about. We'll be covering a few of those in this video. First things first, we finally heard back from Bungie about, well, the next time we'll be hearing back from Bungie. We had a hotfix go into effect this week. And this one was all about fixing and returning content that's going to be coming in the future back to all players of the game, not just DLC players. Of course, that was the hotfix that went in on January 3rd, and it fixed Iron Banner so that players who do not own Curse of Osiris may once again have access to both the Iron Banner and the Faction Rally when Faction Rally is active. This was something Bungie talked about in previous weeks, saying they wanted to change the way those activities work so that it wasn't locked out to people who only had the DLC. I think it was a good change. It did postpone these events. They were supposed to be live like a week or two ago, but we'll probably be getting those sometime within the next week. And I think it was worth the wait to basically not lock players out of any more content. It's one step amongst many that Bungie needs to take if they really kind of want to change the way their game is viewed right now. After that, we got a new article telling us Happy New Year. This is what it had to say. Bungie would like to give you all a warm welcome to 2018. We hope your holiday season was filled with family, friends, and maybe even a fire team of Guardians to share in some winter cheer. The dawning festivities thaw to a close on January 9th. You still have time to make a snowball and tag your best friend or your most dreaded strike boss. There's a new calendar on the wall, and we're already angling to fill it with a new season of rituals and rewards that will be available to all. One by one, our teammates are returning to the studio to get back to work. We'll tell you all about our plans for the next update to Destiny 2 in the next This Week at Bungie blog address on January 11th. See you Starside in the new year. And this basically confirms we won't be getting a Bungie weekly blog update until next week. Kind of a bummer. I was hoping we would hear back a bit more from Bungie and Deej this week, but it seems like we're going to be going about another week until next Thursday before we really learn what exactly is coming next, and probably a few other things. I'd imagine with the furor over the last month and the last couple of weeks, especially about Eververse and the state of the game and all of that, I'd imagine Bungie has to make some sort of response to it. I mean, they kind of have to, right? I mean, the rise against stuff like Eververse has certainly hit a mainstream pitch across the gaming community. You've got all kinds of outlets covering it right now. You've got all kinds of channels on YouTube talking about what should be done with Eververse, whether it should be completely gotten rid of, which is something I think is probably not going to happen. I don't know if that's realistic. Or if we should do something else with Eververse, maybe change the way it works, maybe give players bright dust for completing other activities. Who knows, but they're going to have to make some sort of response to it soon, and it looks like we're going to have to wait another week for it. But speaking on that kind of feedback, we actually got to hear a little bit more from Deej. He took to Twitter to say this. Earlier in the week, game director at Bungie, Christopher Barrett, made a series of tweets basically responding to community concerns about Destiny 2 right now, culminating in a tweet that ultimately stated this. Finally, I know we say this a lot, but we hear your feedback on Eververse. We both want our players to feel respected and to deliver great content regularly to our community. Expect lots of discussion with the dev team and an update on our path forward after the new year. Then Deej took to Twitter to respond with his own tweet stating this. Had my first of many meetings in 2018 with Christopher Barrett today to talk about how we'll follow up on these promises. That conversation will continue next week, once my community partners are back in the saddle, and it will include all of you soon after. Hopefully meaning that they will be directly addressing this Eververse issue right now in the coming week, and maybe a few other things, because Eververse definitely has some issues in it right now. I think a lot of the items that are kept within the Eververse store should probably be earnable in the game just like they were in D1. I don't specifically have a problem with Eververse existing. For the most part, it was fine in D1 outside of stuff like Festival of the Cost. But I think there are some serious issues with the way it's structured in D2, with how much focus is put on it and how many new items are thrown into the Eververse store versus items that you can just earn in-game. And I do believe that needs to be addressed, and I hope it is sometime next week. But it's just good to see that hopefully Bungie is taking this seriously. And I can't wait to see how they're going to respond to the player feedback for Eververse and what other changes they're going to have in store for Destiny 2 in next week's This Week at Bungie blog. A lot of things need to change, and this is kind of a pivotal moment for them, so I expect to hear at least some kind of roadmap for when we can expect to see some of those changes. Now, moving on to something else that I thought was rather interesting from this past week. The Destiny Tracker podcast, their latest episode, came with a very special guest in Kotaku's own Jason Schreier. Jason Schreier, of course, being one of the journalists most well known for his big scoops on Destiny's development, some of the behind-the-scenes things. A lot of leaks that we've gotten that have turned out to be credible have come directly from Mr. Schreier. And he was a guest on their podcast, and he talked a bit about the development of Destiny 2 and revealed actually some surprising facts that personally I found really interesting. The most important of which concerned Destiny 2's development, in that the game may have seen basically a complete ground-to-top rework in early 2016. His quote on this particular issue went like this: "I think that it being Destiny 2, was made in a relatively short period of time. There was a big reboot of Destiny 2 at some point of early 2016. There had been a previous director who was directing the game before Luke Smith took over. So that guy was kind of put aside and Luke Smith took over. I believe that was in April of 2016, but I might be misremembering. Don't hold me to that exact line. So, if you think about it that way, then they didn't really have a ton of time. It had been a 16-month period between the reboot and when the game finally shipped. Meaning Destiny 2 in its entirety may have only had about 16 months of active development time if they did wind up kind of tossing out or reworking everything they had been working on before. And I found that to be really surprising and a little bit ironic given the fact that we know Destiny 1 went through something very similar. It was being worked on for several years, and then about a year or so, maybe a year and a half before its actual release, the game basically got completely thrown out and rebuilt from the ground up. And that's why a lot of Destiny 1, it feels just so disjointed, especially in vanilla. The story just feels kind of hobbled together and out of nowhere. Elements that were supposed to be in the base game, like the Dreadnought, Charlemagne's Vault, all of that kind of stuff was just kind of cut out and then reworked for later content. And it looks like the same thing may have happened, although to a lesser degree, in Destiny 2. And that could possibly explain why there feels like there's a bit of a lack of content overall within the in-game of Destiny 2. Jason also goes on to suggest that they were actually considering bringing most, if not all, of the Planetary content from Destiny 1 into Destiny 2, but that they ultimately decided against it and went with just presenting newer content in Destiny 2 without bringing any of those old planets back. And he believes, like I do, that ultimately that was a mistake. I personally believe there's no reason that places like the Cosmodrome, like Mars, like Venus, like those world spaces shouldn't have been able to come back for Destiny 2 and be expanded on in Destiny 2. Although I still believe that might be a possibility in the future given the data mining and the audio files for public events and whatnot that we found for all of the world spaces for Destiny 1, including places like the Dreadnought in Destiny 2. But it was interesting to know that that was a conversation going on behind the scenes at Bungie, and that they ultimately decided not to bring any of those old world spaces or activities back. Especially given the fact that they had to know that reworking this game from the ground up about 16 months before it came out, doing that whole road again, that there was probably going to be a bit of a lack of content at some point. And it really kind of puts a whole new light on the sort of scramble to get Destiny 2 out in a fully completed form in the time that they did. You know, like I said before, it might explain why the in-game in vanilla Destiny 2 seems so lax, at least for hardcore players who are out there to try to get each and everything in the game. So I thought all of that was very interesting, but it's not where Jason stopped. He also talked a bit about the Eververse store, its origins, and what its original purpose was. Now, he reported on this years ago, and we know that Eververse was originally created as a kind of a way to subsidize the game, keep it going, and to fund the live team creating additional content for the game when Bungie moved away from their 2 DLC packs a year sort of content release model. Remember, the original release model for Destiny was supposed to be game comes out, you have 2 DLC packs, like one every 3 to 4 months, and then you have a big expansion. As we all know, they couldn't keep up with that schedule in Destiny 1. It was too hard to create and curate content, and it just cost too much money for them to put all that work into effect. So, after The Taken King came out and revamped the way Destiny 1 played, they moved to a new system. They would have a live team work on the live state of the game, and they would introduce Eververse to sort of help pay for some of that upcoming content. And then they would just put out sequential expansions. We got Rise of Iron after that, and then a bunch of live events like Age of Triumph and Festival of the Lost that went along with it. And here were Jason's comments on the podcast specifically about that. What Bungie decided was, we can't do this anymore. This is too hard for us to do, referring to releasing DLC packs basically every couple of months after a big content release. The tools that we're working with are really hard to deal with. It's just hard for us to make this much content, and it's hard to make content in general. And they said, we're going to do a smaller drip feed of smaller stuff, and we're going to put up the Eververse store and make money that way sequentially while we're putting out live events. And Activision said okay. It was part of their renegotiated deal that they got to a point where they didn't have to be cranking out so much content. So it looks like Eververse might have actually been a creation of Bungie's rather than something kind of pressured upon them by Activision. And it may have been part of a renegotiation of their 10-year deal with Activision, saying, okay, we're not going to be able to put out 2 DLC packs every couple of months with Destiny 1. Let us get out of that. We'll just do a big expansion every year and a bunch of other live events for the game. And to kind of make up for those lost sales in DLC packs, here's what we'll do. We're going to create a microtransaction store where people can go and buy glamour items and ships and stuff like that. And we'll just let that pay for our obligations to the contract as well as the live content we'll be producing. And Activision said okay to that, kind of giving us a whole new view on the origins of the Eververse store. I am a little bit surprised that it was something that wasn't put upon them by Activision, given that that's the way Activision tends to go in a lot of their games now. Of course, we got supply drop systems in Call of Duty, in Overwatch, and all of that kind of stuff. So it's interesting to see that Bungie initially came up with the concept for the Eververse store rather than Activision. Although, of course, I'm sure they were happy to oblige. But there we go. I think all of that information is really interesting and gives us a good look at how exactly we got to the state of Destiny 2 that we're in right now. Jason goes on to talk a bit about how the different factions of Bungie, there's not always a lot of communication between them. And if you were to ask any one of the many different directors for Destiny 2 how exactly the game got to this state, they probably wouldn't have a clear answer for you because there's just so many different things going on with the game. But he did say that there was a clear concerted effort to make Destiny 2 more new game friendly, new Guardian friendly, I guess is what we would call it. And that involved the casualization of the game so that people who don't want to spend, 48 hours grinding for a raid or a weapon or something like that, they can get in, they can enjoy their time, and then they can get out. And ultimately, while that does widen the door and allow more Guardians to come in, I do believe the total player base for accounts on Destiny 2 is something like 12 million. It's insanely high. It's kind of diving into a very wide but very shallow pool. More people can fit in it, but there's way less water to play with. And I always just think it's interesting to see a little bit behind the scenes for how some of these games are made. But alright Guardians, that's pretty much it for all of the things I wanted to talk about in this video. There's a lot to cover here and I'm sure there's a lot to think about. So be sure to leave us your thoughts on all of this down in the comment section below. Are you surprised that Destiny 2 probably went through some kind of reboot less than 16 months before its release, just like Destiny 1? Or are you more shocked to hear that Eververse was Bungie's idea rather than Activision's? Be sure to let me know down in the comment section below. That's going to be it for this one, guys. I hope you all have a wonderful new year. It's 2018. Let's make this one a good one. But thanks so much for watching. And as always, I am TheBlackLink. You Guardians, stay frosty.